They left home believing they were traveling abroad to build a better future. They had no idea that the job waiting for them wouldn't just take their savings, it would steal their freedom. When four men from South Africa packed their bags for a new life, they weren't seeking adventure, nor were they looking to fight someone else's war. They were simply trying to survive. In a country where youth unemployment routinely hovers above 60%, a steady job offer from overseas isn't just a career move. It is a lifeline. It is the difference between watching your family sink into poverty and building a home for your children. Consider the four men whose lives would soon intersect on a dark and uncertain journey. There was a former security supervisor from Johannesburg, 32 years old, who spent his evenings calculating how to stretch his dwindling paychecks to cover his daughter's school fees. There was a quiet 27-year-old trade worker from KwaZulu-Natal, known by his neighbors as the person who would repair anyone's fence or car for a meal, dreaming of one day opening his own workshop. There was a middle-aged father of three who had spent 2 years applying for hundreds of vacancies across Gauteng, receiving nothing but silent rejection emails. And finally, an ambitious 24-year-old, eager to lift his widowed mother out of the informal settlements and buy her a home made of bricks and mortar. These were not reckless individuals. They were grounded, practical men driven by love, duty, and an overwhelming desire to provide. In the local job market, opportunities yielded perhaps 4 to 500 US dollars a month, if a position could be found at all. When an overseas offer appeared promising, upwards of $2,000 a month, alongside provided accommodation, medical care, and a pathway to international work experience, it did not feel like an impossible fantasy. It felt like the answer to years of prayer. It was an opportunity no responsible provider could afford to ignore. The offer did not arrive through a sketchy text message or an anonymous flyer stuck to a lamppost. It arrived through the slick, polished channels of modern online recruitment. Agencies operating within South Africa, positioning themselves as reputable international labor brokers, posted advertisements across major social media platforms and professional employment boards. The listings were meticulous. They advertised roles for building maintenance officers, warehouse logistics staff, and facility security personnel in Eastern European infrastructure projects. According to accounts provided by the families and legal representatives who later investigated the recruitment chain, the interaction began with impressive professionalism. The applicants filled out detailed questionnaires. They submitted their resumes and trade certificates. Within days, they were invited to digital interviews conducted by polite, articulate representatives who spoke fluent English and acted with the precise bureaucracy one expects from a corporate HR department. The recruiters provided formal draft contracts printed on crisp, official-looking letterheads. The documents outlined 8-hour workdays, paid leave allocations, overtime rates, and safety protocols. The salary, roughly 4 times what the men could earn locally, was presented as standard compensation for foreign specialists working in remote facility management. When the men raised natural questions about logistics, the agency had ready answers. The agency would facilitate the visas, arrange the flight tickets, and handle the entry documentation. All the men needed to provide were clean police clearance records, medical evaluations, and their original passports for visa processing. Everything appeared fully organized and undeniably genuine. There were no demands for cash transfers into private accounts, no clandestine meetups in dark parking lots. Instead, there were formal office appointments, legitimate hotel venues booked for preliminary briefings, and clear step-by-step instructions. The subtle warning signs were so smoothly integrated into standard corporate procedures that even a cautious observer would have seen only a well-run international hiring process. To secure these positions, the sacrifice had to begin long before reaching the airport. While the agency covered the cost of the main international flight tickets up front, to be deducted gradually from future earnings, they explained, the preliminary costs fell squarely on the men. Medical checks, certified translations, police clearances, travel permits, and regional transport to the embassy in Pretoria all required immediate cash. For families already living on the edge of financial survival, raising these funds required extreme measures. One man sold his second-hand vehicle, his primary tool for informal transport work. Another pledged his family's small herd of cattle, a traditional store of generational wealth. The third took out high-interest loans from local informal lenders, betting his family's immediate security on the certainty of his first contract check. Relatives pooled their life savings, passing around small envelopes of cash, viewing the expenditure not as a gamble, but as a collective investment in their shared future. The emotional weight of these sacrifices was immense. As the men said their goodbyes, they were not just carrying suitcases, they were carrying the hopes and financial survival of entire households. What would you risk if you genuinely believed an opportunity could permanently change your family's fate? For these four men, the answer was simple. They risked everything they possessed. The departure day was marked by high spirits and emotional farewells at O.R. Tambo International Airport. Photos taken on mobile phones show the men posing in the departures terminal, smiling, well-dressed, holding their boarding passes. They sent final text messages to family WhatsApp groups. "Boarding now, God is good. We'll message as soon as we land." The initial transit went according to schedule. They flew through international transit hubs, arriving eventually at their destination airport in Russia. For the first 24 hours, the reality seemed to align with the promise. They were met at the airport by local handlers, loaded into a transport van, and brought to a temporary hotel. They sent messages home describing the cold weather, the wide streets, and their excitement to start orientation. Then the narrative began to shift with subtle, chilling precision. The day after arrival, regional coordinators arrived at the hotel under the guise of completing final administrative registrations. They informed the men that, per state regulations for foreign labor contracts, their original passports needed to be surrendered temporarily to the local immigration authority for work permit stamping. Trusting the system and isolated by a language barrier, the men handed over their travel documents. It was the precise moment the trap snapped shut. The dynamic changed overnight. The polite recruitment intermediaries disappeared, replaced by stern, uniform-wearing coordinators who spoke little English. The men were moved from the hotel not to a civilian construction site, but onto a military transport bus. When they asked questions, the handlers responded with sharp commands and vague assurances that they were simply being moved to their designated facility orientation base. As the bus traveled hundreds of kilometers south toward the border, far beyond the urban centers, the men realized with growing dread that the modern world they knew was slipping away. Communication became tightly restricted. Their mobile phones were confiscated for security clearance checks, leaving them with only sporadic, heavily monitored access to their devices. The full, terrifying extent of the deception was revealed at a military facility near the Ukrainian border. The job they had accepted did not exist. There were no warehouses to manage, no civilian buildings to secure. Instead, the four men found themselves handed pre-printed documents written entirely in Russian. Deprived of their passports, operating in a foreign country where they could not speak the language, with no local currency, and miles away from any diplomatic representation, they were told to sign. When they hesitated, the pressure became direct and unrelenting. According to accounts that later emerged from similar documented cases, the handlers presented foreign recruits with a brutal choice: sign the contract or face immediate arrest as illegal aliens and spies, leading to decades in high-security penal colonies. The recruiters who had promised facility management positions in Johannesburg had, in reality, routed these men straight into contracts with the Ministry of Defense or private military contractors affiliated with the Russian armed forces. The vulnerability of a foreign worker in this position is absolute. Without a passport, you cannot book a hotel, buy a train ticket, or approach the police. Without language skills, you cannot explain your predicament to a passerby. Without money, you cannot survive the day. Getting out was no longer as simple as buying another plane ticket home. They had been systematically transformed from civilian workers into legally bound military personnel trapped inside a war machine. Reports and verified accounts from human rights monitors indicate that non-Russian recruits brought in through such schemes were rapidly integrated into auxiliary or frontline logistics units. For the four South African men, the fantasy of overseas employment dissolved completely into the cold, chaotic reality of a combat staging ground. They were issued uniforms, given basic tactical instructions through interpreters, and assigned tasks that placed them directly within range of military conflict. ranging from digging trenches and moving ammunition supplies to guarding forward supply depots near active combat zones. The contrast between what was promised and what transpired was absolute. The advertisement: $2,000 monthly salary, comfortable apartment housing, standard corporate contract, peaceful civil work. The reality: confiscated documentation, severe restriction of movement, living in field barracks, constant artillery noise, and acute psychological terror. The men were caught in a fog of fear, confusion, and isolation. The daily experience was not defined by romanticized heroism, but by the grinding dread of knowing that a single artillery strike or drone attack could end their lives in a country that was not theirs, fighting a conflict they did not understand. They were isolated from one another, surrounded by armed personnel, and forced to carry out orders simply to stay alive day to day. Thousands of miles away in South Africa, the atmosphere inside four homes turned from quiet optimism to overwhelming panic. At first, the changes were subtle. The frequent voice notes and photo updates stopped. Then came short, cryptic text messages received at strange hours. Phone being taken away. Don't worry, very busy. Within 2 weeks, the tone of the communication changed entirely. In brief, rushed phone calls, often made in hushed tones from borrowed phones, the horror broke through. One mother recalled receiving a call where her son wept silently for 30 seconds before whispering, "They lied to us. We have no passports. We are at a military camp. Pray for us." Then the line went dead. The families were cast into a state of absolute powerlessness. They gathered in living rooms, comparing notes, realizing that all four men had been taken through the exact same pipeline. They visited local police stations, contacted the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, DIRCO, and approached human rights organizations. Yet the legal and diplomatic reality was an agonizing wall of red tape. A family in a township outside Johannesburg cannot simply board a plane to rescue a loved one from an active military zone in Eastern Europe. Embassy officials explained that verifying the whereabouts of citizens who signed foreign military agreements, even under duress, is an extraordinarily complex, slow, and politically delicate process. Weeks stretched into months, defined by sleepless nights, unpaid debts hanging over their heads, and the agonizing silence of unanswered phone calls. What happened to the four men? The documented outcomes of foreign recruits drawn into this conflict vary, and in the case of these four individuals, the reality reflects the messy, incomplete nature of real-world investigations. According to reporting by international journalists and statements released by diplomatic sources investigating unverified recruitment networks, one man managed to escape. Utilizing a brief period when his unit was rotated back to a rear staging area, he made contact with a network of informal diplomatic fixers and anti-trafficking advocates. After days in hiding without documents, he was brought to the South African Embassy in Moscow and eventually repatriated. His testimony provided the crucial first-hand account of the intake process. Two men remained unaccounted for. Reports indicate their units were moved closer to active lines of contact in eastern Ukraine. Official diplomatic inquiries yielded conflicting responses from foreign authorities. Some documents listed them as active service volunteers, while field reports suggested they were missing in action following heavy shelling. What happened next to them remains unclear. The fourth man was reported wounded. Field medical logs accessed by human rights researchers listed him as receiving treatment for shrapnel injuries in a regional facility, after which his administrative status was classified as restricted. The South African government subsequently issued stern public warnings against unauthorized foreign military engagement, emphasizing that the mercenaries and human trafficking networks operating these schemes face severe criminal prosecution under domestic law. Investigative journalists who attempted to trace the original recruiting agency in South Africa found that the local shell company had dissolved its corporate registration, closed its physical offices, and disconnected its contact numbers within days of the men's departure. The operation that ensnared these men was not an isolated anomaly. It was part of an organized, highly lucrative ecosystem of international deceptive recruitment. These networks operate by exploiting structural vulnerabilities. high domestic unemployment, weak regulatory oversight on cross-border labor brokers, and the legal gray areas surrounding international defense contracting. The mechanics of the scheme rely on a careful division of labor. The front agencies. Local recruitment entities act as the clean facade. They register as standard commercial employment agencies, run professional social media ads, and handle initial interviews. They maintain plausible deniability, claiming they were merely acting as placement agents for foreign employers and were unaware of the ultimate military application. The document trap. By requiring applicants to surrender their passports for visa processing or work registration upon arrival, the network strips the worker of their primary legal protection under international law. Financial leverage. By fronting the initial costs of travel, the recruiters create an artificial debt. When the worker arrives, they are told they owe thousands of dollars for logistics, a debt that can only be cleared through the military contract offered to them. Authorities across multiple developing nations have since identified similar recruitment pipelines operating across Asia, Africa, and South America, drawing thousands of unsuspecting men into foreign defense support roles under false pretenses. The story of these four men serves as a stark, urgent lesson for anyone seeking employment opportunities abroad. An attractive job advertisement, a professional interview, or a well-designed contract does not guarantee that an opportunity is legitimate. To protect yourself and your loved ones from deceptive international recruitment networks, you must systematically verify every link in the chain before stepping onto an airplane. Verify the agency. Ensure the recruitment agency is formally registered with your country's Department of Labor or equivalent official regulatory body. Cross-check their license number directly with official government databases. Verify the employer. Contact the foreign employer independently using contact details obtained from official corporate directories. Never rely solely on the phone numbers or email addresses provided by the recruitment agent. Verify the visa. Genuine work opportunities require a specific legal work visa issued directly by the destination country's embassy or consulate in your home nation. Never travel on a tourist visa, transit visa, or business invitation with the promise that a work permit will be sorted out upon arrival. Never surrender your passport. No legitimate employer or agency has the legal right to confiscate your passport. Your travel document is the property of your issuing government, and retaining control of it is your primary protection while abroad. Independent legal review. Have any foreign contract reviewed by an independent legal professional or a local labor rights organization before signing. Inform authorities and family. Always provide immediate family members with complete details of your travel itinerary, the exact address of your destination accommodation, copies of your contract, and contact details for your country's embassy in the destination nation. The men who stepped onto that plane did not do so out of a desire for conflict, recklessness, or greed. They were fathers, sons, and brothers trying to build a secure life for the people they loved. They were searching for work, stability, and the simple dignity of an honest wage. Their story is a sober reminder of how easily human hope can be weaponized by those who view human lives as disposable resources. A promise written on a contract can quickly become a cage when no one stops to verify who is operating behind the screen. If an opportunity promises to change your life forever, how much are you willing to risk before asking one simple question? Who exactly is waiting for you on the other side? Verify before you travel. Verify before you pay. Verify before you surrender your documents. And never allow the desperation for a better life to silence your instinct to ask questions.
Thanks for watching. If you value authentic storytelling and real-life journeys, please support the channel by liking this video and subscribing to Folklife Chronicles. Behind every story is a human being, and behind every closed door there may be a truth we never knew. Until ask yourself, how well do we really know the lives of chronicles?